Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rena Joseph, Senior Marketing Manager at World Congress, and I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar sponsored by AMPS Continental Benefits and Health Rosetta. Learn how many CFOs and CEOs are reducing total health benefit spend by 20 to 40% while improving outcomes and employee satisfaction. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. First, you should be able to see a title slide on your screen. If you're having any problems viewing the webinar or encounter any technical difficulties, please use your chat box to send a question directly to me, the host, and we'll try to help you. Second, I'd like to explain how we're handling questions. Due to the number of attendees, participant lines are muted. If you'd like to submit a question for our presenters, please do so using the question box on the right side of your screen. Please submit your questions to all panelists. We'll be monitoring the questions for anything urgent, but we really want to respect everyone's time and try to keep this webinar within the allotted time frame. We'll answer all those we have time to address during the program, but please do feel free to contact our presenters with any additional questions. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the video so that you can view it again. Now, I'll turn it over to Dave Chase, founder of Health Rosetta Certified Brokers Program, to get us started on today's webinar. Dave?
Thanks, Rena. Appreciate everybody attending. Great attendance. Well, you know, on the Health Rosetta Institute site, which is at www.healthrosetta.org. We say healthcare is already fixed. Join us to scale the fixes. And what I've found is over the last several years, as I've studied and written about employers who are spending 20 to 55% less on health benefits with some of the absolute best benefits packages in the entire country, there's a few things that pop out. You know, I wrote one piece in Forbes with the title, the headline was something to the effect of, the best way to slash healthcare costs is to improve health benefits. And there's really two key takeaways from these organizations. Number one is CFOs and CEOs realize they need to apply the same care to health benefits as they do any other major cost item, given that healthcare is their number 2 expense in many cases. I thought an anecdote from a large private equity firm was interesting. After they acquire a company, they've got a group that works with them on their health benefits, and they said, you know, after, it might be some manufacturing company they acquired, and after the, you know, in that first meeting, the first question they ask the CEO is, how's your healthcare business? And they often get puzzled responses because they say, oh, we're a manufacturer. And he says, well, how's your $42 million healthcare business, or whatever their healthcare spend is? And then the light bulb goes on, like, oh, wow. You know, would you manage a $42 million division in the same way that you're managing your health benefits and by the same team? A lot of times that's not the case. The second piece that's a key takeaway is they work with great benefits consultants. And, you know, we really see a parallel. You know, you may all remember stockbrokers that were around and, you know, largely went the way of the dodo bird because there weren't aligned incentives. They just got paid on transacting stuff. You know, the smart ones reinvented themselves as wealth and financial advisors. And, you know, sadly today, most of today's benefits brokers are kind of the equivalent of stockbrokers of 25 years ago. But the winning benefit consultants align their interests and properly disclose all their fees, and the sort of organizations we're going to talk about today are doing that. So later on, I'm going to share my prediction for what I think will have the biggest impact in 2017 for employer-based health care in the middle class. Remember that more Americans get their benefits via their health care basically through their work than any other source. And I think the impact of what I'm going to share will be actually bigger than the ACA when it comes to employer-based health care in the middle class. So my recent TEDx talk was entitled, Healthcare Stole the American Dream, Here's How We Take It Back. So I'm going to pass the baton to Jeff Bernard, who spent 18 years at Aetna, where he left as a senior vice president before becoming the president of Continental Benefits, which is a next generation third-party administrator, TPA. And John Powers, who spent 15 years in the benefits industry and is currently executive vice president at AMPS, which is a leader in reference-based reimbursement. Jeff, tell us how we can take back the American dream.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. depending on where you are. So in this presentation, we're going to go over a few things. Nothing here should shock a lot of people. A lot of it's common sense. But we're going to talk about the issues today first. Secondly, we're going to talk about 5 real solutions that CFOs and CEOs can do to get back their margin, get back and reduce their healthcare spend. Number 3, I want to point out there's no pointing fingers here. All of us in America are in this situation that's been created. Our solution is to get it fixed. Lastly, CFOs, I want you to hear this. You have options, okay? And we're going to talk about what those options are. So let's get into it. So this quote is excellent. The world as we have created is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. We need to change the way that we think, we provide, and consume healthcare, period. It's too costly today, and what we're doing today simply does not work. And I think everybody on the call can probably agree to that. So if you look at the United States, I'm from Houston, Texas. As they say, Houston, we have a problem. The whole country has a problem. What we are doing today is simply not sustainable for America, and we need to make a change. We spend $3.4 trillion on healthcare. We top the world in what we spend on healthcare. So if you take a look at and break this down from a GDP per person basis, we spend $10,000 in 2016 per person per year on healthcare. So when you compare that to other industrialized nations, okay, Switzerland is at $6,900, Germany $5,200, Sweden $5,100, Canada $4,600, France $4,400. So we're almost twice a lot of these industrialized nations. The nearest one nearest is Switzerland. So currently, it's 17.8% of our gross domestic product in 2015, and the member out-of-pocket cost, which we'll address today, member out-of-pocket increase was 2.8%. Okay, so if you look at this and break this down, in 2015, hospital care went up 5.6%, clinical services went up 6.3%. Pharmacy went up 9%. And I think the thing that everybody is looking at right now and be aware of is specialty pharmacy. That thing's ready to explode, not in a good way from a cost perspective. So if you look at $3.4 trillion, okay, what does that look like? It's a lot of money. We're going to break this down in our presentation, and we think that 1/3 of it is wasteful spending. So we're going to break wasteful spending down, that 1/3, into 3 buckets, okay? Fraudulent claims, which is really bad stuff. Those are claims that were paid when the service was not provided. Those are the type of things that land people in jail and we all have read in the paper, providers, there's certainly bad apples that do that. We're not going to focus on that much today. We're going to focus on the last 2, which is waste, which is defined as unnecessary services, and errors made, mistakes that are made on hospital bills, and then thirdly, abusive or excessive charges. So those are charges that are in excess of 200 to 500% of Medicare, and it does happen. So we'll talk about that. So if you look at $3.4 trillion, about 75% of it is the waste and abuse. So those are unnecessary services, errors or mistakes on hospital bills. In our presentation, we're going to talk about what you can do to get that money back. And then we're going to also talk about certainly the abusive charges, which is the other part of that 75%. So the interesting thing, if you think about this, again, I told you $3.4 trillion is the American spend in healthcare. If you reduce that by the third, okay, if you just take out waste and abuse, that'll get you about to where Switzerland is on what they spend per person on healthcare. If you take out fraud, waste, and abuse, that gets you to about where France and Germany is. And we're not talking about taking benefits away from people. We're not talking about decreasing or making outcomes worse. We're just simply talking about putting price controls in place and not paying things that shouldn't be paid, as we call mistakes, waste, or abuse, okay? So the problems that exist today, so these shouldn't surprise anybody. So, to start with, as employers, when they buy healthcare for employees, a lot of the problems that I see in my career at Aetna, and I was fortunate enough to sell some of the biggest accounts, private and public, in America. I work with a great team of people, but a lot of times employers with more than 15,000 employees, they buy one national PPO network for everybody, okay? And to me, in that situation, they've traded off cost for convenience, okay? There used to be a time when many plan sponsors offered multiple network options, but they just don't seem to do that anymore. So cost for convenience has been done, and it's shocking to me that people offer one PPO plan, okay? We're still buying healthcare based on discounts, okay? And that's just silly. It's funny money, as I call it, and we'll discuss that more. Nowhere else. I actually found two other places that funny money exists in our economy. One is how government spends, and two is, to some extent, how we pay for education and the runaway inflation on colleges these days. But healthcare, buying on discounts doesn't work. We'll prove that out. Assumption that employees want unlimited networks. Not everybody wants to eat at the all-you-can-eat buffet. Some people actually don't need it, and they want to do something a la carte. So they want narrow network plans or high-performance plans that is not as expensive but has the quality providers. We'll talk about that. But it's a misassumption to think that employees want everybody in the network. Four, there's no plan choices for employees. I don't know whatever happened to choice, but it seems to have gone away. And many times when we talk to people, we'll say, yeah, why not offer choice? And we'll say, well, we do offer choice. We offer a high-option PPO plan and a low-option PPO plan with Blue Cross. That's not choice, okay? That's the same network, the same big group of providers, the same folks doing medical bill review, et cetera. A lot of times current carriers or TPAs adjudicate claims at 80%. So whatever comes in goes out. That's like all of us paying our credit card statements, only looking at the first page and not going into any of the details, okay? As Dave said very well, CFOs, for whatever reason, aren't typically involved in the healthcare purchasing. And this really leaves me scratching my head because for most companies, it is the second largest expense for employers, only behind payroll. And many times we find CFOs engaged in things such as workers' comp, which is certainly a fraction of healthcare costs, or other expenses down the food chain. But we think it's important that CFOs get on the bus and get engaged and be a part of the solution here. Shifting too much cost to employees, that does not fix the problem. That upsets employees and certainly hurts your retention. The concept of shifting cost to employees is no different than you taking a balloon, a long balloon, and squeezing it on one side, it pops out the other. That's exactly what shifting cost does. It doesn't really fix any problems. Some people do not provide advocacy programs to assist employees in navigation, okay? It's much needed. People need help in finding the care. Excuse me, I forgot to move the slide. Need help in navigating the system and finding the care. They're not considering value-based networks. We still have fee for volume, so that's something we'll talk about a lot today. They're not providing population health programs for folks with chronic conditions, okay? People with diabetes, digestive issues, they need people to help guide them to the system, and they need programs to keep them on track. And then second to last, people are paying too much for health care, okay? And we're buying off of a discount. We think that a 58% discount is good off of inflated charges, but when you realize that 60% of a payer mix for a hospital is Medicare at 100%, many times employers are paying north of 180 to 500% of Medicare, but they think that a 58% discount is good. So, and lastly, I'd say is the transparency. Everybody needs to know who's getting paid what, and I would encourage all CFOs to ask the question of the consultants, do you receive any overrides or undisclosed compensation? Everybody needs to know, and we need to be perfectly open. Trust is essential, certainly in healthcare. So as we talk about the solutions and how do you save up to 20 to 40%, we're going to go through 5, okay? And I'm going to talk through relatively fast because we have certainly only 45 minutes and we want 15 minutes for questions. So first and foremost, I'd say And this goes under the category of providing choice, okay? There was a time when employers provided choice to employees, and that kind of went to the wayside. So there are other options out there today. It doesn't just have to be bought by what we call the BUCAs, okay, under a self-funded arrangement. There are a new group of TPAs that are coming up these days, such as Continental Benefits, and I think there's 4 or 5 others, that we refer to as super TPAs. And those super TPAs are defined as those that have access to the carrier networks, like an Anthem or an Aetna or a Cigna. They're also well capitalized, and they're able to work. No, third one is that they're independent. They're not owned by a carrier. That's very important. And fourth is that they're able to integrate successfully with all the best-in-class vendors in the market, whether it's a PBM, a wellness vendor, or a population health vendor, okay? So the first solution is to move from a carrier administration to a super TPA that has multiple network options that also include an A network, such as a Cigna or an Aetna. Now, how do you do this? You simply offer the big, broad network, the PPO network, the carrier network, alongside a narrow network option. So as an example, Imagine Health is a good quality-based narrow network that does reduce the spend above most broad networks in markets like Dallas and Houston and some of the others by as much as 10% based on quality delivered and unit cost of those networks. So what you do in that situation is you offer one alongside the other. You allow employees to choose. Typically in those type of situations, the narrow network is slightly less expensive from a payroll contribution, and the PPO is slightly more expensive, okay? So the result, which will be in this situation, is that you should expect year one, not shifting benefits, actually improving benefits on the narrow network plan, to reduce medical spend by at least 15%, okay? And sustain that going forward. What you've done is you've removed that waste and abuse that we talked about in the upfront slides. It's not a difficult thing to do. What we have to do as an industry is pick our head up. There are companies, as I refer to as super TPAs, that have outstanding vendors, have great technology, and have an ability to remove waste from the system. And we're going to show you how you do that. The risk is low, implementation is easy, adoption is easy, and that one TPA can provide complete administration over both narrow networks, the quality-based narrow network and the big broad network. And recently, there was a national account that rolled this option out using a TPA, and they expected only 25% of the people would enroll in the quality-based narrow network. And it was a few dollars less in payroll than the big, broad Blue Cross network, let's say. But what happened is actually 75% enrolled in the quality-based narrow network versus the big, broad network. So what that tells me, a person who's been in the industry a lot, is that people will gravitate to richer plan designs. They'll vote with their paycheck, and not everybody needs every doctor in the network, okay? So it's a really important thing, and we do expect 15% reduction in that year one. That's solution one, and you can get that from any super TPA like a Continental Benefits. Number two really has to do with just in general, and this is kind of similar to number one, but instead of offering 2 options, a narrow network and a broad network, offer one option. So let's say you have Aetna, and or let's say you have United now. I'm not going to pick on any, I'm just using names. And you like their PPO, and you want to move to Continental Benefits with the Aetna network with the PPO. We can do that. We can set you up. We'll do an analysis match. We'll find out that the unit cost is similar to what United does, and we'll find, surprise, surprise, that 99% of the members, dependents, et cetera, match well. So we have a good provider match. Now what we do in this situation is we offer that PPO network with us. The difference what we do to reduce the spend is the following, and this is open source. It's not silver bullet. It's not magical. Carriers in general auto-adjudicate 80 to 85% of the claims that come in. A super TPA like us auto-adjudicates 50%. So simply said, we're paying more attention, we're applying technology processing cues to make sure that we're paying what we should be paying. So we have a claim fiduciary responsibility to the plan sponsor, and we don't pay anything without checking out for mistakes through clinical edits and through medical bill review, okay? The second thing that we do is that we lower the threshold for what we call medical bill review, okay? So prior to paying any claim, we check for black and white issues, for mistakes and errors. Now, we do not question whether a PPO charge is excessive or not. That's not up for us to decide. We have to respect the PPO contract. But we do reduce the threshold at looking at claims to $5,000 versus perhaps $30,000, which you may find at a self-funded carrier network. And it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. We simply find more mistakes, okay? And we don't pay a claim until we make sure that all the waste is taken out of it, okay? So for what we do is $5,000 threshold for in-network, $1,000 out-of-network. We scrutinize the bills. We ask for an itemized bill from the provider. We work with our partner, AMPS. John's on the phone right now. And between the two of us, we have clinicians. People look at the itemized bill, and we find a tremendous amount of mistakes. And I'll talk about the mistakes in a second. Thirdly, anybody that's on dialysis, we do carve that out. And we do create a concierge program for those people, and we pay approximately 120% of Medicare, as opposed to what you'll find with most carriers, which is up there at 180 to 300% of Medicare. So dialysis is a very expensive feature as well. We do pay, and then what we do focus on is out-of-network claims. So we do pay out-of-network claims at 120% of Medicare, and we try to enforce that. We do use our partner AMPS to ensure that that they negotiate out those claims. Even though out-of-network claims are not expensive, excuse me, are expensive. They're not much in quantity, but they are very expensive, okay? So what you'll see in that situation, simply, and I'll show you real examples, if you move from a carrier-owned TPA or a carrier self-funded administration to a super TPA, you should expect 8 to 15% reduction in overall cost going to a PPO network to a PPO network, an APPO network. Risk is low, adoption is easy, and we administer the plan. And the thing that I want you to notice is nowhere in this discussion or this presentation do we involve the members or hassle the members at all. This is all done behind the scenes between Continental, AMPS, and the providers. We think it's extremely important to be fair to providers and to treat them with respect. But if something is a mistake, it's a mistake. If something's an error, it's an error, and we take care of that. So, so the things that I would say that most questions that employers can't answer, but you should check out for your self-funded TPA is, you know, what are you doing to audit hospital bills, okay? At what threshold are you auditing hospital bills, okay? As you'll see there, a stat that John provided me, the U.S. government RAC program finds errors on 95% of hospital invoices, okay? So, John, do you want to get into the slide?
Sure, and you know, this is kind of just a fundamental question that, you know, what gets measured gets managed, and everything else that most employers are doing today to manage their costs, as David touched on earlier, it's just not happening with your ASO, or as Jeff referred to them as BUCA, Blue, United, Cigna, Aetna, administrative services only providers. But there's an assumption that the claims administrator is auditing large dollar claims on their behalf, and if you ask why, most employers will say because it's in the contract. And when I challenge an employer and say, well, have you seen a report that shows the results that they're finding, there's usually crickets during the conversation. And I share with them that, you know, the U.S. government, through their RAC audit program, or the Recovery Audit Contractor Program, finds errors on 95% of all Medicare claims when they audit them. That's a pretty good idea that there's hospital billing errors on most every claim. And if your current claims administrator is not finding those errors, they're not helping you achieve your ERISA-defined responsibility. But that's a great first question to ask your claims administrator is, hey, what are you doing to audit claims? And I think one of the reasons why they're not doing it is they typically are just applying the PPO discount. If they have a $100,000 claim and a 50% discount, they apply the 50% discount and you pay $50,000. What AMPS and Continental does is stop that claim and audit that claim to make sure that valid claims are paid and fabricated claims are exposed. So the second question would be, it's great that you have a 50% Blue, United, Cigna, Aetna discount, but what does that really mean? I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and I can't figure out what the value is. So ask your PPO or your ASO provider, what are we really paying, and cut through the BS of the discount and benchmark it against something like Medicare. So those are the two fundamental questions that, if you take nothing else out of today's presentation, if you ask your current claims administrator to answer those, it will help you determine how much additional you might be paying. Thanks, Jeff. Next slide. And during our audit of these claims, we use our own proprietary technology, but also board-certified specialist physicians to review each and every claim. These doctors are former medical directors, and so just like you've heard the adage of it takes a crook to catch a crook, these specialist physicians know where to look. They find things that are just mind-numbing, like an oral cleansing device billed at over $1,000. You may have seen that in the Time magazine issue that came out a couple years back, the bitter pill. But they also find things that it would take only a physician who's done that procedure or done that surgery to know that you don't need an assistant surgeon, or know that that's not right, the right evidence-based medicine to provide. So these are the things that we're finding on all claims that really help contribute to the claim mitigation. Next slide, Jeff.
Yeah, and I can take this. So what I told you in the previous slide is that if you move from a BUCA self-funded carrier to a super TPA like Continental, what you'll find is that it's a 10 to 15% savings. And here's just two examples of two recent clients. And what you'll see is in-network claims and out-of-network claims. We use AMPS as our integrated carrier. They do an outstanding job. What you'll see here, in-network, we started in this part of the country with a 41% discount, okay, with a A-rated carrier. Through AMPS medical bill review, what they found in network is they extended that. They found additional savings of $499, so that's $500,000. Mistakes and errors. Again, under this A network, we cannot question whether a charge is reasonable or not, but we can check to see if there's errors. So we found $500,000 in additional errors. Remember, we look at all claims over $5,000. AMPS certainly doesn't work for free. They take 25% of the savings, and it's well earned. And then that's a net 16% savings on in-network claims. So we extended the discount on claims that we reviewed from 41% to, what is that, 57%. So it does work. These are real numbers. We provide it to real customers, okay? And on out-of-network claims, similar situation. You'll find the claims aren't as much, but they're very costly on the volume. So less but more volume, or excuse me, they're higher dollar numbers. In this situation, AMPS delivered an additional savings for a non-par claim, out-of-network claim, of 72%. Net, 54%. So in this situation, we almost have same discount in and out of network, as you'll notice, 57 to 54. When we apply the work that AMPS does to the total spend, so the above box is just the claims that are over 5,000 in network and over 1,000 out of network. When you apply it to the total spend of the medical spend of the group, that's an additional 13% that we save them over and above their medical spend, what they would get from a unit cost discount from a BUCA network. So in all my years of working for certainly large carriers, we've never delivered that, okay? So paying more attention to errors, abuse, waste does matter, okay? That's one example. And another one, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but for time purposes, similar situation, different client, you see that they saved 13.9% versus 13%. So it's about where my range is, 10 to 15%. You don't have to change much, folks. All you have to do is go from a big carrier PPO network to a TPA administering with better tools, as I described about. That's it. Easy administration, low disruption, low risk to an employer. So it does work, and it does work very well. And we're going to continue to do this. And if I didn't say this, most of our business does come from Blue Cross and other carriers who just don't have the technology tools and best-in-class vendors to put this into place. So we're very excited about this. So let me move along, because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So the third solution, and this result gets you 10 to 18%. So you can move from a carrier administration, again, to a super TPA. And what you want to do in this situation is offer an ACO, an accountable care organization, alongside the big broad, in my example, the Aetna network, okay? So give people choice. An accountable care organization is going to be productized. It's not an attributed model. It's a productized model where the provider signs up for shared risks or shared savings. An independent actuary sets a per employee per month cost, and that integrated delivery system known as an ACO works on improving outcomes, which will decrease cost. In year one, I would expect total reduction between the broad PPO and the ACO in a particular market to be as much as, again, 10 to 18% combined, but I would say the ACO is probably more like 15 to 8%, 10 to 15 for the broad, okay? So we do expect great success there. And this is probably more applicable for an employer that's got a large concentrated population in the market, such as a school district or a city or a manufacturing plant, to make it worthwhile to set up that productized ACO, okay? But, and then for people that don't live in an area, because I know a question was asked before, well, what do you do with a narrow network if you don't have a lot of people in that geography? The same thing would apply. What happens if you don't have for a lot of people that live in where the ACO is? You just offer it in the areas that you do have it. And then you offer the broad Aetna in the other areas, and you focus on reducing the mistakes and so forth. So there aren't high efficient narrow networks or ACOs in every part of the country, but you take advantage of where you can, and you take advantage of those savings, okay? So the implementation adoption is a little bit more, a little bit medium versus easy, because we do have to work with the hospital system. They hopefully already have a clinically integrated network, and Continental does piggyback off the MSSSP, which is the model used by Medicare under their ACO model. So, but we're excited about this, because in this model, we not only reduce costs, reduce waste, but we also improve outcomes through an integrated network. But huge savings right there, and it's something that most any super TPA can set up for you. So before we start to get into some of the bigger savings, I want to make sure we have time for this, and then John's going to talk about next slide on RBR. So there is an option. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of intrigue about reference-based pricing. Continental does do reference-based pricing in addition to doing PPOs. So it doesn't have to be the or, it can be the and. So you can come to a TPA like Continental. We can offer a reference-based plan as an option alongside of a carrier PPO network, okay? We give people choice. In that situation, you offer side by side, you allow them to choose. Lower payroll contribution for the reference-based plan with slightly richer benefits. I would expect that 30 to 40%, this is my opinion, will take the reference-based plan in year one. The reason why is that it's 20 to 40% less expensive, and typically as an actuary working with an employer, you're going to have that much lower of a payroll contribution, but most employers who do this also are going to have slightly richer benefits, and people will gravitate toward benefits that will be richer. And in this, you're not only, again, removing waste and abuse, but you're also reducing unit cost, and John will talk about that in a second. When you offer a reference-based plan alongside of a PPO plan, it's really important. So I put a risk as medium, implementation adoption as medium. It's no longer easy. The reason I put it as medium is it's essential to communicate and have the right partner, such as AMPS. You have to have a very good, reputable reference-based client that is put in place, and John will tell you why that is in a second. But you also have to educate your members on how the plan works. Just like all of us went through years ago, when we went from indemnity plans to HMOs and PPOs, it was a change. We needed to be informed about how that works. So my prediction is administration is relatively easy. One TPA, like Continental, administer services for both networks. You can have one PBM, we'll do all the reporting, but it's like a two-horse race. In this two-horse race, I would expect the RBR plan to be at least 20%, closer to 40% lower in cost than any carrier network in year one and beyond, and we'll show you an example of that. John, let me turn it over to you to talk about the fifth option, which is if folks want to move their entire population to a reference-based plan.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. And just for those of you that might not have a deep knowledge of reference-based plans or reference-based reimbursement, essentially, instead of the PPO model, which is a discount off of billed charges or a top-down pricing methodology, reference-based is a bottom-up where AMPS would use, for example, the average of maybe 150% of Medicare and that facility's cost-to-charge ratio at 35%, and take the average of those numbers to take their costs and mark it in or include in a fair profit margin. So think about it from the employer perspective as more or less a defined benefit. This is, going back to 30 years ago, my mom used to give us $30 for school shoes. That's what we got to spend, and we had to act as consumers and find those school shoes for the right price. We couldn't afford to shop at Neiman Marcus, but our incentives were aligned with my mother's incentives, and it worked towards better outcomes for us all. So if you're wondering how many employers are moving towards reference-based reimbursement, well, I can point to an article last year in the SHRM, or Society of Human Resource Management magazine, where they queried their members, and they said 68% of them believed that they'd be moving to some form or fashion of reference-based pricing in 2017. And I can attest at our company, we're certainly seeing a great influx of business where employers are fed up with that illusionary discount and trying to take back control of their health plan. Probably one of the most important features is that aligning the plan incentives with the member incentives. And Jeff, can you go to the next slide? So it really starts with AMPS being named as the fiduciary on hospital and facility claims, and we adjust the plan document language to allow us to basically administer this program in conjunction with Continental. We then work with Continental to educate the members of the health plan, including those folks at the HR or benefit level where most employees might go to. And then we would act as the repricing engine for Continental to do that medical bill review and that repricing analysis to get that claim to fair market value. One of the questions that came up was how would we protect the member from balanced billing? And that's certainly a deeper conversation, but it starts with our proactive member advocacy team that helps the member understand that they need to pay their deductible or co-insurance, and then we work with the facilities to resolve disputes on the member's behalf. And it's a pretty detailed process with both our internal legal team of lawyers and paralegals, a national reputable, one of the largest litigating law firms in the country, as well as a third-party credit repair organization on the infrequent case that there is some credit damage there. Jeff, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is part of that full spectrum of defense and how we protect the member from balanced billing. It starts on one end with an advocate that the member can reach out to help them understand their responsibilities and if they've been balanced billed. I don't know about you, but I've been in this business a long time. It's very difficult to read an AOB, so many of the questions we get are just helping the member understand that. And it works through this entire spectrum, as you can see on the slide, and those legal contingents that I spoke about. Next slide, please. And we had another question that said, for a health plan that has members spread out throughout the country, how do we help them navigate the narrow networks? And you can think about AMP as a narrow network. We have direct contracts with over 1,000 surgical centers around the country. We have direct contracts with some hospitals around the country, and it really starts with communicating with the member to help them navigate what their choices are to help save both the plan as well as themselves money. So the Care Navigator aspect is really the concierge type approach that holds the member's hand and helps them get to the best outcome, both financial and medically. Next slide, please.
Want me to take this, John? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So for the purpose of time, you know, the question really comes up: does it work? Does reference-based work? Yes, it does. Okay. So here's one example. You have a political subdivision, 400 employee lives. In 2008, they moved over from Blue Cross PPO. You saw their PEPM at the bottom, and you see it carried through 2015. So you'll see the difference is it's half, okay? So their medical PEPM didn't really increase any time over the past 6 or 7 years. And what we did on the red line is we trended that PPO at 8% a year. So you see the difference. It's a huge difference. You know, if folks are willing and able to take the step to reference-based pricing, they kind of really solve healthcare for their clients, but it is an education process, and it is something that senior leadership at any organization has to be on board on. We have another client who had about 1,000 employee lives, same result, okay? They moved in 2008, and in 2014, you'll see the difference. Half, they've really had no increase at all in trend over this time. This is in the state of Texas. As you know, in Texas, where I live, the state teachers are having some tough issues with cost and so forth. This particular client, which is a school district, it actually increased their benefits, and their funding has remained static for the past 5 years. So no issues, able to attract talent, and able to have richer benefits. So that's real positive. So it does work. As you'll see here, I said you could lower your cost by 40%. You know, these prices are half of what a PPO would be, even at an 8% trend. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about the responsibility of the CFO as it relates to ERISA?
Yeah, you bet. This is going back to my comment earlier on the prediction, I believe that this ERISA fiduciary duty coming to employers has the potential to have a bigger impact on the middle class and the workforce, where most people get benefits than even the ACA. And so there's a couple key takeaways here. One is the fiduciary duty in general, according to my lawyer friends, is one of the highest duties under the law. And ERISA, which you know regulates employers, there's two key areas of ERISA: retirement benefits and health benefits. And it's been very clear on the 401k side, if you put the employees' retirement funds into Uncle Bubba's investment fund that's got high fees and terrible returns and there's kickbacks to the broker, you will get sued. And there's been, many class action cases, one that went all the way to the Supreme Court in the last couple of years, unanimously in favor of the employee class. But historically, that ERISA fiduciary duty wasn't applied to healthcare as it was viewed as the employer's money, because the idea is if you aren't stewarding the employee's money, there's not the fiduciary duty. But that's just simply not the case. So let's put aside the fact that healthcare costs have caused 20 years of wage stagnation. So I'd argue it was actually the employee's money all along. But water under the bridge. Today, it's a 70-30 split. Employers picking up 70%, employees picking up 30%. In the last 4 to 6 months, we passed the 50% threshold where over 50% of the workforce has over $1,000 deductible. That makes it impossible to make the case that it's not the employee's money, therefore the fiduciary duty very clearly applies. And I have, a little bit of language from the Department of Labor site in terms of what the language is. And Jeff, if you can advance to the next slide. And there's really two canaries in the coal mine that I've seen in the last month or two. The first is a Big Four accounting firm, one of their risk management practice leaders said that the largest undisclosed risk they've seen in their career is the ERISA fiduciary risk. And that has led them to refuse to sign audits if there was an allowance for the ERISA fiduciary risk disclosed. So that's a big deal. And then related to that, in 3 public companies that I'm aware of, outside board members have raised this as an issue because they're realizing with ERISA, that's a personal financial liability when there's a dereliction of duties, and that may not be covered by directors and officers policies. So that's a big deal. That's going to spread around rapidly. So these are things that are, I've been writing about on Forbes and more recently on my LinkedIn blog for quite a while. You're seeing multiple cases in the works. This is coming. Make no mistake, it's just a matter of when, not if. So let me pass it back to you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I think that, and I echo your comments. I get calls all the time, not all the time, but pretty frequently from lawyers. And I think the chum's in the water. And if I'm a broker and I'm a consultant, I would be sure, or a CEO or a CFO, ask yourself these questions. Are you doing everything in your power to reduce your spend? So we run across a lot of public entities that haven't bid in 3 or 5 years. They may face an issue, breach from taxpayers, okay? If you're a corporation, shareholders. Second question, have you considered any of the 5 options, okay? So, RBR may be a little bit further down the road, but you can certainly move to a TPA that can pay more attention to claims. Are you doing that yet? So I think what we're doing is, again, back to the Einstein slide, you got to think about things differently. We're doing things the same way we've done the past 5 years, and that's a question that I'd ask. Are you managing those healthcare costs the same way that you had been for 5 years? 5 years is an eternity in healthcare. There's a lot of great things that have happened, a lot of new companies coming in the market to detect waste and fraud and abuse and all that, and I'd take advantage of it. So as a CEO, CFO, broker, consultant, I'd be aware, because what Dave is saying is absolutely correct. The chum is in the water, and lawsuits, I'm sure, will be coming from the class action. So, this is a great quote I like. Don't let the mixed signals fool you. Indecision is a decision. So choosing not to do something is a decision. It's a conscious decision. So what we hope we've done in this presentation is giving you some thoughts and some ideas about what you can do to get that cost down, and again, anywhere from 10, 15, 20 to 40%. Every company is different. It doesn't mean you have to dive in head first the first year, but start doing something. You have a fiduciary responsibility, as Dave had talked about, to your employees, to their families, because it is commingled funds, to make sure you're doing everything in your power to stretch those dollars as much as possible, improve outcomes, and reduce spend. So I'm going to stop there. Here's our contact information. Rena, I'll turn it over to you for questions, or Dave, excuse me.
Yeah, I'll take that. And in terms of contact information, I'm Chase Dave on everything, Gmail, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can Google me. And
Chase Dave, Chase Dave at gmail.com.
Yeah, and I'm not the Sopranos producer if you Google me. But let's go to some Q&A. We've been getting some questions in the time we have. I'll direct them towards Jeff and John. And so the first question is, are your programs more successful in certain areas of the country?
So I think the question is being, I assume it's being asked around reference base. Well, let me start off. Medical bill review is popular everywhere, all 50 states. I do want to say one thing, because there was a question asked, because it was asked, in Maryland is the only state that does regulate facility charges. Kudos to them. So medical bill review, we still do it because we still find errors in Maryland. But John, why don't you talk about the reference base and kind of where it's popular in certain states?
So it's more prevalent in certain states like Texas, Indiana, Ohio, and has a longer track record there. But we've got members of health plans living in 48 different states, and so it's probably a little more successful in urban areas and rural areas, but in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, most folks aren't having complex surgery. So the short answer is it's more successful in some areas than others just because it's more prevalent. However, it can work in any region.
Great, thanks, John. Second question is, doesn't the current claim administrator provide audit services? It says that they do in our current ASO, agreement.
Yes, great question. So I just got off the phone with the Wall Street Journal, and there was a person asking me questions about this. And so the answer is yes, okay? So and I'll tell you, it's a great question. And I've worked for both many carriers and obviously now a TPA. The difference is to what extent. So you can say on a weekend, you can watch football, but there's a difference between high school football and pro football. And not to sound full of it, but there's a difference between doing medical bill review part of the way and all the way, and what thresholds you start. So I'm getting ready to publish a paper, an outside independent actuary, that shows we are incrementally better than the carriers based on paid versus allowed charges, but they still do it. They still check for things like fraud. They do run edits and so forth, but the key is what type of technology you have, what thresholds they apply to it, and more importantly, what outside vendors do they use. Not paid to say this, but I think AMPS is the best in the business of what they do, and there's a lot of others that are probably well behind them. So it depends what vendors you use, what technology, what process you put in place.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Next question came in is, what data would I need to request from my insurance provider for you to see how much I'm overpaying? And am I going to be able to obtain the necessary data to be able to do that?
Go ahead, John.
So that's a great question, and certainly you would need a census to show where your members live and what facilities they're utilizing, but also what's simply put as an ANSI standard 837 output, which is the necessary data we need to analyze to show, had you been in the Continental AMPS program, what savings you would have realized on that. And, you think it's your data, and most brokers say it's your data. The employer owns their own data, but the carriers definitely make it difficult for you to get that data, which is part of the shroud of secrecy around their pricing methodology. Hey, in the interest of time, guys, I saw 3 questions pop up that I can answer in 15 seconds. And one, is there a size limit? Certainly the bigger you are, the more leverage you have with a hospital. AMPS has groups from 75 lives up to 53,000 employees. So our average is probably in the 800, or the median is about 800 lives. How do you arrive at your pricing methodology? And we believe we've got more hospital pricing data than anyone in the country, and that's a big statement, bold statement, but we believe that most of the carriers aren't getting the itemized bills. And as Jeff mentioned, we get the itemized bill on every single claim we look at. In order for us to price that, we look at our own historical data as well as the Medicare data that's available to the public. And finally, the same data that's available to the public is called the cost-to-charge ratio, which is the actual cost that a hospital incurs to provide a given service. Finally, the other question I saw real quick was, why would a hospital accept less than they're getting from a BUCA? Well, when plan incentives are aligned with member incentives, and as I showed that Care Navigator program, if I needed knee surgery in Houston, Texas, I could go to one of the big facilities, or I could go to a surgical center that's going to accept half of the major hospitals, and it's going to be a brand new surgical center with best-in-class equipment, with entrepreneurial doctors that have skin in the game as far as the outcomes, whereas most hospitals are just hotels for sick people. So why would a hospital accept less? They're starting to see deterioration through the competition, through these surgical centers and other options available to us. So when a member goes for health care, if it's a planned event, it's not much different than buying a car. If you could drive to San Antonio from Houston and save $1,000 on a car, every person would, and many times the member doesn't have to drive to save more money. So when given that choice to the hospital, remember, it's not you that gets access to the hospital, it's your orthopedic surgeon, and the hospital's got to make a business decision.
Great, thanks, John. Next question is, you mentioned the group's fiduciary responsibilities. Does my current claims administrator protect me from those risks? And what's the best way to ensure that we're not only meeting but exceeding those ERISA-defined responsibilities?
Yeah, so the answer is this. You can never delegate completely your fiduciary responsibility, so the answer is no. They can take what's called claim or appeal fiduciary responsibility, and you can pay them like we do to do that. But ultimately, the ultimate fiduciary responsibility falls on the plan sponsor, which is typically the CFO and CEO. So you can't totally delegate it in a self-funded plan. You can have someone else assume, again, appeal and claim liability responsibility, but not you can't delegate yourself because the plan sponsor is the ultimate fiduciary.
Great.
I was going to say one more thing. So someone asked a question real quick about if you're a healthcare system and your employees use a domestic network, is RBR, is there an ability to use that? The answer is yes. Not for your in-network, obviously, because you've already fixed your charges and you set that as a domestic network tier, but people are still going to use out-of-network, and you could definitely use medical bill review for out-of-network charges, because that's where, and we do have hospitals with us now, and they choose to pay 120% of Medicare for anything going out of their domestic network. I just wanted to answer that. Sorry, Dave.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks,
Sure.
Jeff. May as well knock off a few as we go through, since we're running low on time. Next question is, can my current carrier administrator provide reference-based pricing or reference-based reimbursement?
I'll take a shot at that one.
Go ahead.
Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll take a shot at that one.
Sure.
We don't believe they can. They purport that they are, but just for certain types of claims. And when you think about who a carrier's client is, sometimes it's the employer group, but their probably biggest asset is their relationship with hospitals. So we think that if they're in a difficult position when they have these PPO arrangements, to have some groups have a defined benefit as you would with reference-based reimbursement. So we don't think that they can. They're starting to talk about the fact that they are, but we just haven't seen it yet. There were two other quick questions that came across about are we seeing more PPOs write in no audit clauses? We've seen no audit clauses, especially in Cigna's agreement, for example, which I looked at the other day. On page 3, it said, you know, if you're going to access our PPO discounts, you agree not to audit. And then on page 17, it said, well, if you do audit, here are the rules you have to follow. We've never actually seen a PPO agreement that truly prevented an audit. And if you think about it, that definitely is a violation of the group's, you know, ERISA-defined fiduciary responsibility, saying, hey, you're going to get a 50% discount, but you got to pay for mistakes. That may have worked 10 years ago. It doesn't work today. And that leads into the next question. Are we seeing more and more litigation? AMPS has not had to go to court over a reference-based reimbursement program. If you think about it, an employer is more or less bulletproof. The federal government has stated through their FAQs that an employer has every right to define their benefit as long as it's at fair market value. So we don't see many employers have litigation in their future, but possibly members. We see all the time hospitals saying, well, if you don't pay, we're going to sue. As the fiduciary of the plan for the hospital and facility claims, AMP says, well, that's great. We'd rather you not, but which courthouse do you want to go to? And really, the way that movie would end is we would, under discovery, look at all their hospital billing practices, and the hospital would have to, you know, explain why they're charging $300 for Tylenol at some point in time, or why they're charging, you know, $200 for a $2 bag of saline solution. So the litigious environment is not one where a hospital looks good. Plus, hospitals are going to be around a lot longer than us, and do they really want to be tried in the court of public opinion and suing, you know, the average employee in this country who's got a median income of $51,000? That's just not a good environment for them, and that's one reason why we haven't seen much litigation or any litigation against a plan or a member.
Great, thanks, John. There were some other questions that came up. We're going to have a follow-up for the registrants, so we'll try to address the questions we weren't able to tackle during this time. Want to respect everybody's time on the call, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, and look forward to follow-up. And thank you again to Jeff and John and to the World Health Congress folks, and we'll see you on the web. Thanks so much.